Okay, now I would like to invite our speakers to turn on their videos and microphones. So we will start the Q&A soon. Sorry about the technical problem just now. I hope that Zoom will allow us to have a good conversation. I will encourage our participants to submit your questions if you have. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. First of all, I would like to ask our speakers, in particular Svante, to share your thoughts, your reactions to each other's presentations. Well, particular Svante, because the presentation was prepared by Pan. If you have any additional thoughts, please do share with us.
Thank you very much. Well, I don't think I have very much to add to the presentation made by Pan. It's fairly comprehensive, and I've been involved in all of those areas, and it's more a matter for the participants here to see if there are any further pieces of information that would be interesting to discuss. But I've listened to the other presenters here, to Douglas and Mettiäinnen, and I found it very interesting since I've been involved in Arctic Council matters myself. My hesitation is, in addition to what Douglas here presented, is that that some consequences of then solar radiation modification, even if the amounts are small, might actually cause benefits and disbenefits at regional scales that could cause more trouble actually than the uneven distribution of the warming and changing precipitation patterns. So I think that's something that one can also keep in mind when moving ahead.
Great. Anyone to share any thoughts, or Doug, if you want to have any reaction to?
I think in terms of SRM, I think in principle the only decision today is whether to do more research on it. I think one of the concerns that I would have with regards to SRM, I mean, there's lots of reasons to be concerned with, right? But is whether somebody would, out of desperation, choose to go deploy it without having done the research to adequately understand the benefits of the risks. It's in the Arctic in particular, there's no real technological barrier to doing that, and there's not a dramatic cost barrier. There's, of course, you don't want somebody to go ahead with that without adequate governance and international agreement. And you also don't want someone to go ahead with that without adequate scientific research, which I don't think we actually have today. So I would basically agree with Svante. There's risks, and of course the challenge is there's risks to inaction as well. And so it's ultimately going to be a really difficult set of decisions of whether to move forward or not move forward with any of these strategies. And I think a critical framing question on that is whether it's a implied substitute or whether it's a addition to other actions like cutting our carbon emissions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Doug. Ilona, do you want to come in, or?
Yeah, sure. Actually, now that I heard the comments by the previous speakers, so I just started to think about this rogue deployment. So like how much would they be, like, let's say some country would start this rogue deployment. So how much would they be impacts if they were able to continue this for let's say a few weeks before there would be some kind of global intervention to this rogue deployment? But what do you think, Doug, about this?
Zero.
Okay.
Zero.
So okay, but
basically, if you want to have an effect, you basically have to, if you're imagining, well, stratospheric aerosols, which is sort of the easiest to imagine being deployed in a rogue fashion in the relatively near term, you would presumably be flying aircraft up and releasing material, and you would have to sustain that for a year or more to get any detectable effect at all. And so, either you need your own Air Force or the implicit backing of other countries that have that. And obviously, geopolitics are complicated things.
Sure.
But, if the international community really wanted to stop it, they could, unless they have to weigh that with regards to what the geopolitical consequences of stopping that are.
Yeah, very often when people talk about like the risk of rogue deployment, they seem to think implicitly that it would be just like one plane spreading the particles once, and then it's there and it's there permanently. And I think this is a surprisingly common misunderstanding on the issue. So basically, what you said, Doug. So this would mean that if there was a certain party, let's say a country or company, that would start the deployment without a global agreement. So there would be time for the global community to react on this before there would be actual environmental impacts.
Yeah, and then of course, even if you sustained it for like 2 or 3 years and then stopped doing it, if you stop putting the material up, then it all comes back down. So
Sure.
You don't necessarily get, so some of the environmental impacts would be long-term accumulation of acid rain, for example. That's much more of an issue if you're sustaining large amounts of it for a long period of time, where long is now like decades.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thank you for these clarifications. Doug, you mentioned geopolitics. I want to ask 3 of you, if anyone wants you to share, your thoughts. Why it's important to think about the geopolitics in the region when we talk about the governance of these approaches or technologies. You want to have a
I'm looking at Ilona. I think that she might be to start off, but I think it's unavoidable. As a matter of fact, I mean, anyone involved in the Arctic Council knows about how some of the countries behave and what sort of interest they have in the Arctic, and there is this continuous also split between those who want to exploit the Arctic and those who want to protect the Arctic. It's not self-evident exactly what different nations or groups within the nations actually would like to do with the Arctic. So I think you have to consider all of these aspects.
Yeah, I agree with what Svante said. Yeah, sure. And I mean, there's so high, well, even like commercial hopes towards the opening Arctic, and all these sea routes and stuff. So yeah, sure. Countries have a lot of like high stakes concerning this. Of course, it's kind of sad that there are so high positive hopes for the, well, also for the consequences of climate change. But yeah, I mean, like deciding like how to deploy and what would be the designs to aim at. So yeah, yeah, and anyway, like what are the chances that Arctic countries would have actually all agree on these issues? So this is of course like has to be speculated. To my knowledge, there has not been any studies on the stances of each Arctic country and whether they agree on this. But this would be a very relevant study, in fact.
Yeah, I think the only thing I might add to all of that, I mean, of course, in any situation in which you have substantial transboundary influences from your actions, geopolitics is inevitably should be considered. But this is an area where the Arctic might view that they alone should be taking the decisions, and rightly or wrongly, both a choice to act and a choice not to act will affect everybody on the planet, right? So what climate changes in the Arctic are relevant to sea level rise and weather patterns outside of the Arctic. And so you may find countries outside of the Arctic feeling that they should have a say. And it is also true that if you were, for example, to do stratospheric aerosols in the Arctic, the climate effects of that would be focused more on the Arctic, but that does change the climate everywhere on the planet to some extent. So outside of the Arctic, people will also say, hey, wait, how come I wasn't consulted in that decision?
Certainly. And also also the impact between countries would be very, very essential in this matter. And that's why actually we need research on this topic. We need research on the different impacts, different designs, different technologies on the science, so that this, of course, like you can't have a meaningful governance process without knowing what you are deciding about, or organizing the governance around. Yeah.
No, I also agree with that, and I also think that you should look at other climate impacts, or rather other environmental impacts and other economic impacts from doing this, and as the consequence of climate modifications or that you would get by undertaking such projects. But coming back to the role of the Arctic Council, I mean, I think most of the countries are aware of the fact that doing something in the Arctic would have global or at least hemispheric consequences. And the funny thing is that I think that the basic powers on this Earth are actually represented either within the Arctic Council itself or in the group of observers. I mean, China picked that up already 15 years ago, and they become very active and following very closely what's happening. So I don't think there is any risk that it would go unobserved by other countries. What the Arctic Council members would do and not do.
Great, thank you. Following this topic, and I would like to ask, although the indigenous people's perspective are important and their voice must be heard, but you mentioned that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in Arctic; it also impacts other parts of the world. How can the views of indigenous people can be weighted, against the views of the rest of the world? In rest of the world, people may be in favor of the potential deployment of SRM, but this idea may not be welcomed by all the indigenous people in Arctic. How do you see this problem?
I'll try to defer to the people with more direct Arctic experience, other than the observation that, even the indigenous people, you're not going to get a uniform, it's a very, very diverse set of people, right? You're not going to get a uniform answer from them. So unclear who speaks for them, but certainly they're not going to be able to form opinions without having adequate knowledge about what choices are on the table as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So there's been this some studies trying to find out how local Arctic residents think about climate altering approaches, like stratospheric aerosol injection in particular. These studies have found that there's been concern on the controllability of these approaches, but also about the fairness. So in a way, like for instance, in our Lapland case study, so we started actually by design talk. So we started like finding out what people were concerned about concerning climate change, and then talked about more or less kind of what kind of goals should this SIA have. And then after we returned to the site with the model results, so actually this the whole conversation turned into ethics talk. While the plot showed that it would be basically possible to halve the impact of climate change by SAI, so then the locals thought that it wouldn't be like really fair to maintain their nice winter conditions, because they thought that there would be possibly some very negative impacts to people elsewhere on the planet. But the question is also there that One of the principles is that also Arctic people should have a right to have regional economic development, and in some cases this is related to industries that benefit from climate change. On the other hand, then this the Cryosphere exchanges also change cultural issues, traditional livelihoods, and also the image of the place itself, and also if you think about, for instance, winter tourism, so snow conditions is essential for them. So I mean, this is a question of, like, I think that very often the question of economy comes there. But returning to your original question, so about Arctic residents and indigenous peoples in particular. So yeah, of course they. I don't see how they could be seen insignificant. On the other hand, I mean, on the contrary, it's very important to also discuss with those who are impacted but also by climate change, but also by potentially these climate altering approaches. But then again, you can't really contrast the importance of different groups of people. So is somebody else's life more valuable than the others? So and also the question of, as I mentioned in my presentation, so the Arctic population is just a small fraction of the global population, and sometimes, if we contrast the small amount of people to the large amount of people, so this is one of the ways of framing these issues, and then there's of course this some kind of special role that yeah, I mean, there's so many ways of framing how different people, or globally speaking, that there should be a say in this matter.
Great. So let's move on. A question from us on research. Doug, you mentioned about a lot of things to be done in order to find a lot of research to be done, and also Ilona, you mentioned some guidelines in the Arctic. So if more research is required, how can this be coordinated by founders, and how can we bring to bear the perspectives of indigenous people in the Arctic?
I think that's a really good question. I think there's some of the research is just sort of, I don't want to say, at some level it's obvious, right? It's, we need to, if you're interested in understanding what the effects of stratospheric aerosols would be, you can run climate models and look at what the effects would be on the cryosphere and permafrost and so forth. You can look at acid rain effects and so forth. You can need to resolve uncertainties in stratospheric processes. And some of those questions don't necessarily need a significant effort in terms of public engagement. But in terms of sort of the broader questions of what directions should we be going and what are the impacts that are important and so forth, and so what scenarios should we be considering, what risks are important, there's an awful lot of co-development of the research agenda that would be incredibly valuable. And I think the challenge is trying to figure out how to do that at some level globally. And particularly given that funding models, right? If there's a research program in the US, it's funded by the US government. But we don't have a mechanism really for funding international research and saying, okay, well, here's a giant pot of money. What's the right way to direct that into different specific regions that need to participate in that?
But Doug, may I ask you, isn't it true that, I mean, various research groups, they find their means of cooperating if they have a common interest, without being a sort of global pot of money that goes to different research groups at a sort of supranational level. You can still fund them nationally, but they can also organize them joint projects, like with the expeditions in the Arctic itself, for example. I mean, that is very good examples of that.
I think that's broadly true, although that doesn't necessarily then extend to providing those resources to other groups that aren't sort of contributing the direct scientific resources themselves, right? it's straightforward to get cooperation across developed countries, but that doesn't necessarily extend to saying, hey, this indigenous group should also be participating in the research. How do we make sure that that happens?
Yeah.
Assistance, international assistance. I mean, funding research in developing countries, that's something that's been going on for a long time, actually. So bilateral, multilateral funding by means of international assistance is a natural way.
Okay.
Right.
If you want to do it.
Right. Let's move on. We're close to the end of this session. If any participant wants to raise a question, please do so. I have a question here about business. Well, big business increasingly thinking to exploit Arctic resources at the region or open up with climate change. How do we bring them into the governance debate, or should they not be brought into the conversation? Or please share with us your thoughts.
Well, I think that whether we would like these resource issues to be considered or not, I think they are anyway in the interwoven in the different countries' interests and like that. Yeah, I don't see that that it would be possible to exclude a resource extraction viewpoint at all. Yeah, I think they are essentially part of it.
Mm-hmm. Also, I forgot to say that. Sorry. Can you be precise about any approaches, technologies when you answer formulating your answers?
Well, if I'm thinking, for instance, Arctic shipping, so I suppose these plans for opening new sea routes would be seriously damaged by any plans of refreezing the Arctic, for instance. So in that sense, yeah. Well, I'll just mention this. Maybe others would like to continue.
I think there are many more examples, actually.
Yeah.
But you also see expressions of different interests.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Perhaps this is the final question from us. The Arctic is changing faster because of the climate change than anywhere. Should it be the top priority and focus for the future use, potential use of climate altering approaches? Again, please be precise about which approaches or which group of approaches when you answer this question.
May I only ask a question for clarification, what you mean? Sure. You say it's only because the Arctic is warming at twice or more the rate of the global warming, and that should then trigger sort of this line of reasoning.
Yeah, I turn this question to Doug, or maybe you can help answer because in your presentation you touched on.
I actually didn't get the question because I think my internet dropped out for a moment, so everything froze.
Svante is asked why we consider Arctic the priority. Well, one of the areas why climate-oriented technologies or SRM could be potentially deployed at the big because it's warming faster than any other places in the world.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's the absolute temperature change per se, but I don't think most people don't really care directly about temperature. We care about all the things that temperature is related to, like sea level rise and loss of sea ice and permafrost and so forth. So it's the fact that the changes in the Arctic and the projected changes are potentially more dramatic than in many other places, and the risk of tipping points. I sort of don't really like that word very much because it sort of means different things to different people. But there's no question that there's more dramatic shifts that are possible in the relatively near term in the Arctic that could have pretty lasting consequences and maybe irreversible.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. And if you go back to Pam Pierce's presentation, it started off with a picture of passing thresholds in the Arctic and the Antarctic and in the Cryosphere region as a whole. And that is important, and that's very temperature depending. But the consequences, they manifest themselves in other ways. The global consequence of sea level rise of 1 to 3 meters, I mean, that's something really that you should do your utmost to avoid. So whether that should be through mitigation or an early intervention by means of solar radiation modification, for example, that is very much what this discussion is about. I mean, you would say that to have a more sustainable and long-term sustainability, mitigation would be the first choice. But we need much more research actually than in come to grip with what we could actually do and achieve in the event that mitigation efforts will not be enough.
Great. So we're close to a closure. We don't have any question from the floor, from the participant. I would like to ask each of you to share with us your final closing thought, something that we must take away from this discussion today. Who wants to have a go?
Thank you for being able to participate in this discussion. Yeah, I have enjoyed that very much and learned quite a lot. Thank you.
I would just say this: the difficult decisions are ahead. This is not going to be easy, right? There's going to be consequences regardless of what path people take, and I don't think we wish we were not in a situation that we're in.
I can only agree with the previous speakers. This is a very important issue, very urgent problem. Even we are seeing signs of changes already now, and it's like for 30 years there's been talk about this, and it's certainly time to do something. Mitigation is of course number one, but additional methods may also be needed. But yeah, thank you so much everybody for the great discussions. It was really nice to talk with you about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, it's a very complex and challenging issue. We as C2G will continue to catalyze the debates and discussions in one way and another. It's indeed a very insightful and useful discussion, at least for me. For our participants and also people who may watch our video at a later time, you can find further resources on this topic on our website, in particular a 2-page policy brief and a more detailed evidence brief will be coming out soon. The draft is now under consideration. You can again sign up for our newsletters to get the first-hand information. Please complete the post-event survey to help us improve our future event. Lastly, I would like to say a huge thank you to our 3 distinguished speakers, to my colleagues who are here today, and to all of you who have participated in this webinar. With that said, I would like to close this session. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.